This video will be the simplest explanation of V-Carve inlays you've ever seen. We'll be creating this V-Carve inlay, and I'll show you the exact steps you need to take. No overcomplications, no confusion, and no, you do not need to be a CNC expert. Now before we start, let's take a look at the two types of inlays and how a V-Carve inlay is different than the traditional straight flute inlay. So this cutting board right here is done with a straight flute inlay. And what a straight flute inlay is, if I were to cut this cutting board in half and show it to you, what you would see is something similar to this. And so how it works is you pretty much just pocket down your material just like this, and a piece of wood goes right into it just like that. The problem with these types of inlays is that you can't do really fine detail work. And the reason is you're doing everything with a straight bit. And so you're limited to the diameter of the bit that you're using. And so though this is pretty and beautiful, you can never get the type of intricate work that a V-Carve inlay does. And a V-Carve inlay uses a V-bit to have a certain type of shape and allows you to do a lot more intricate work. So how a V-Carve inlay works is you have your male material right here and then your female material. And since you do everything at an angle, whenever this piece drops in, it forms a really tight bond on the edges. So the first thing we're gonna focus on is the female part. Now, since this is the female part, I think it's only fair to give her a nice, beautiful name. And since she is gonna be made of maple, let's call her May. And her counterpart over here, since this is the male part and it's made from walnut, let's give it a proper name for a male part with walnut. Now, if y'all guys have better names, let me know in the comments of what I should have called them, because I'm kind of on the spot here. So our walnut piece is gonna be named Wally. So Wally and May are about to get together in this video and probably get a little sticky. So back to the female part, Miss May. So how deep should you do a V-Carve? Well, in my personal opinion, it really doesn't matter that much because there's gonna be so many varying depths, but I personally like to stick to about 1/4 of an inch to 0.20 inches. But once again, you can do whatever thickness you want because remember, that V-bit is going in and out of the material at varying depths. So the deepest part of this V-Carve is gonna be set to 1/4 inch. Now, with all that being said, you may be asking, well, what angle do you need to do this at? So let's talk a little bit about the bit selection we're gonna use today. So what type of bits do you need for this V-Carve? Well, of course you're gonna need some type of a V-bit. Now, I prefer in this scenario to use a 30-degree V-bit. I've seen 90-degree V-bits work, 60-degree V-bits, but I like the 30-degree V-bit in particular for this case that we're doing today because it gives me the depth that I need and the speed that I'm gonna need to cut it at. The thing about this particular bit, it is a 3-flute solid carbide V-bit. And the thing I like about solid carbide V-bits is that the tip actually doesn't break as much as a carbide tipped V-bit. And so this thing, we know it's machined to perfection and it has 3 flutes, which will allow me to go a little bit faster when I'm machining so this cutting board doesn't take so dang long. Now the next bit that we will be using is a 3/16 bit. Now, why am I using a 3/16 bit? Well, we're gonna have to do some clearing out of different materials, and you can use a 1/4 inch bit for this, an 1/8 inch bit. I find the happy medium is a 3/16 bit. So this is gonna allow me to do everything in one pass instead of multiple passes with the 1/8 inch bit, and allow me to kind of get the detail I need that this 1/4 inch bit would not be able to do. And so this is the happy medium that I have found to work really good for clearing out material when doing V-Carve inlays. Now that we know what bits we're gonna be using, let's hop on over to the computer and start programming what we're gonna carve into Miss May. All right, today we're gonna be engraving this beautiful deer scene into our cutting board. I already set up the job dimensions as an 18 by 12 inch tall piece of material. And the reason I'm doing this deer board today is because it looks pretty complicated and a little bit scary, and I do not want this to be intimidating to you. So all of this looks a little crazy, but I'm gonna simplify it for you in this video. Now, what I'm showing you today will apply whether it's a deer scene like this or just a simple name like Miss May. Either one is going to work just fine. So we are going to be doing the female part of this inlay first, which is Miss May. And like I said earlier, we're going to be going a 1/4 inch deep with our pocket and just doing a simple V-Carve toolpath. So all you do is select all the vectors you want. Then you come over here and do a flat depth of a 1/4 inch. After that, you select the 30-degree V-bit, and I'm running, these are all my settings. I have a 1/4 inch pass depth and an 80 inches per minute feed rate with a 50 inch per minute plunge rate. The next thing we're going to want to do is choose a clearance tool. And the reason you want this clearance tool, because it's going to clear out all of this material right here that it's going to take a while for that 30-degree V-bit. So I come over here, I select my 3/16 upcut bit, and these are my settings for my 3/16 upcut, that 80 inches per minute and 40 on the plunge rate. So I select that one, I put a little bit of a 1/2 inch ramp, and I click calculate. What this is going to do whenever it's cut out, that 3/16 upcut is going to come in here and clear out all of this material. And then that V-bit, it has a lot more work to do, but it's going to come in and clear out all the other material. And as you can see, that is our vector image right there that we want engraved. So this right here is our 3/16 pocket clear out, and our other toolpath is a 30-degree V-bit female pocket. So we'll get those saved and we'll hop down to the CNC and do our female part, which is Miss May, at that 1/4 inch pocket depth with that 30-degree V-bit and that 3/16 upcut as the clearing out. And once again, this applies whether it's this deer inlay or anything else you want to create on your cutting board. Our two pieces of materials that we're going to be using today is a piece of walnut for the male insert. This is Wally. He's going to be 0.6 inches thick in a 12 by 18 inch piece, and we're making him out of ingrain. Miss May, on the other hand, is going to be out of maple, and she's going to be 1.7 inches thick and also ingrain, and she's going to be 12 by 18 as well. And if you want ingrain pieces like this, we do have them for sale on CSC Workshop, where you can interchange different bases, whether it's walnut or maple, or do multiple colors of different inlay tops like this Wally right here. And so you can mix and match and make your own ingrain cutting boards. So let's get this center part marked out right here and start cutting. So we have our maple securely fastened to the table. I'm just using T-slots with some simple clamps right here. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do that clearing out first. So we're going to put that 3/16 bit in. But a couple notes, whenever you do put a bit into a CNC, first thing you're going to want to do is make sure your collet's always clean. Because if there's a lot of dust in this collet, what's going to happen is it's not going to secure your bit like you'd want it to. So you always just want to make sure it's nice and clean, and you put it in and you give it just a little squeeze. Not trying to be He-Man, but you're also not trying to be too gentle. So right there in between. Now our bit is securely fastened, our material is secured down to the table, our center is marked, so now we can put that as the origin and start cutting. So as this is cutting out, notice how that 3/16 upcut is making really quick work of everything and really ejecting those chips upward. Now, we're cutting this out on the alt mill, and I really do love this alt mill as a CNC machine. So if you are interested in this, check out the link in the description, as it does help out the channel if you do use that link when looking at the alt mill. But look at that, just making really quick work. And what I do like about cutting on end grain, notice these chips, they're a little bit different because the grain is pointing upwards. So to me, cutting end grain when doing V-Carve inlays works the best just because of the way the grain is textured. All right, so as I'm changing out these bits right here, notice that that 3/16 bit did everything in one pass. It didn't really scream that loud. It's not hot or anything like that. And even though it's an upcut, notice how clean all these edges are. That's because of the end grain factor, and you're not gonna have a lot of chip out. So using an upcut bit on an end grain cutting board is perfectly fine. Now, once again, making sure this collet's clean, the collet nut is clean, and I'm putting in my 30-degree V-bit. Now we're gonna run this in one pass as well, because that 3/16 bit took away a lot of the hard material that this bit's gonna struggle with, and this bit is gonna just zip through and do what it needs to do. And because it's solid carbide and has those 3 flutes, I do not have to take multiple passes, even though I'm going a 1/4 inch deep. Now, one important thing to note, since I did do a bit change, I'm gonna have to reset my Z0 point of my other bit, because the distance from the bit to the spindle did change. But I do not have to reset the X and Y origins, because I need this V-bit right here to go over the exact same places that that 3/16 bit did. And the Z height is really important because I need it to go the exact same depth that that 3/16 bit just did. So it's really important to make sure that you Z0 each bit exactly the same, so they are each going down a 1/4 inch into the material. No more, no less. And you do not have to reset that X and Y origin, because it's probably gonna get hogged out and it's already set. Do not touch it. We got our Z0 set. Let's start cutting. Another thing that I really do like about this alt mill is how quick it goes from point to point. And so that's called the rapid rate. And so whenever it picks up and moves over like that, it's just a beautiful thing. And you don't really get to see that a lot in hobby type CNCs. So that is another thing that I really do like about this machine. Now notice how fast that 3-flute bit is cutting everything. Because it is a 3-flute bit, I can run it a little bit faster. And because it's solid carbide, that tip's not breaking, and it can handle that full 0.25 inch pass step that it's doing right here. So it's just really cool when CNCs get to work together with the X, the Y, and the Z, and you almost get this little wavy thing going. If you're liking what you're seeing so far, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, as we'll be doing more CNC related content in the future. All right, so that's all the cutting the female part needs. Now you may be wondering, you see all these different fuzzies in here. This is just a little stainless brush. All you have to do is just brush it. And so that 30-degree V-bit gives me enough stability in all these pieces so I can go around there with this brush and start cleaning everything up. The next thing we have to do, now that we have Miss May all pocketed out and ready for Wally over here, now we gotta cut out Wally, the piece of walnut. So what we have right here is exactly how the male needs to fit in the female, just really zoomed in. To give you another example, here's a smaller version of how this works, right? And so the male part is gonna fit into the female part and have a tiny little gap underneath it. So there are a couple parameters that you need to know whenever you do a V-Carve inlay. So we have our male piece Wally. It's gonna go into our female piece. And so, as you can see here, we have it all pocketed out, so we're gonna need to do the inverse of what we just pocketed out with the male piece. That's gonna be on the programming side. It's a simple flip. I'll show you that when I'm on the computer. But all the settings that you need, we can define those now, so I don't take a whole hour showing you this on the programming side. Okay, so the settings that you need, so far we figured out the pocket depth. So this 1/4 inch that we just went down is the pocket depth. And that's all you really need to know for the female. This Wally right here has a few different variations that you need to see. Okay, in order for Wally to fit perfectly in here without touching the bottom, because if Wally right here touches the bottom, then you don't have really tight edges. Okay, so you want Wally to go as close to the bottom as possible without touching. So what is this gap at the bottom called? This gap at the bottom, this is called your glue gap. Now, the glue gap doesn't necessarily mean the gap for all your glue to puddle up at. That's what people like to say. What it really is more of like your tolerance gap. So just in case you're off on Z-heighting it, or you have little tiny fuzzies at the bottom, it's something that this thing won't hit so it doesn't do a bad connection, right? And so a glue gap there's a particular range, but a glue gap typically needs to be 0.02 inches. This can range, you can try to do a 0.00 glue gap, but I have found that 0.02 or 0.01 work the best because you do need a little bit of a variance right there just in case you screw up. To give you an example, we have our little piece right here. That distance underneath these two pieces right here is a 0.02 glue gap. Now the next thing you need to know, your plug depth. So your plug depth is simply your pocket depth minus your glue gap. And so if our pocket depth is 0.25 inches, once again, that's how far we went down into this cutting board, and our glue gap, we want it to be 0.02, then our plug depth is going to be 0.23 inches. Very simple math. So you add those two up and it equals your pocket depth. Very, very simple. Now, once again, how to come up with these parameters in your particular software may vary, and I'll show you how to do it in V-Carve here in a little bit, but those are the 3 parameters we have so far. The next thing is going to be this right here. This gap is called your surface gap. And what the surface gap is the little space in between so you don't glue the top of this inlay to the base of the inlay. So it forms kind of a couple different reasons. So imagine you cut this up and you want to cut it off. Well, now you can stick it sideways, stick it in your bandsaw, and have a little place to cut this off. You also don't want this gluing to your cutting board, and so you want some sort of a surface gap here. You know, you can make it 20 inches tall, you can make it just a little bitty bit, but I do have a recommendation for the surface gap that we're using today. So my surface gap that I like to do is 0.1 inch thick. So about 1/10 of an inch. You can do a 1/16, which is 0.06. I don't really care, you just need a little bit of a gap. And so that is your surface gap. So this right here that I'm showing you has a 0.02 glue gap and a 0.1 surface gap. So you see that? There's that 1/10 of an inch surface gap. And if you notice, I could actually make that surface gap go bigger to go all the way up to over here if I wanted to. But a 1/10 of an inch is fine, and it gives me the gap that I need whenever I am surfacing everything off, and you'll see that later on in the video. Now back to this glue gap right here. This is gonna get me in trouble because there's been a ton of videos that say 0.06 or 0.02 or no glue gap at all. Here's the reason for this 0.02 glue gap. Going back to tiny piece over here, tiny Wally in May. This right here is a 0.06 glue gap. So what happens when you have a 0.06 inch glue gap, if you do it over a wide span like this, your piece ends up being hollow. And so this 0.02 glue gap is thick enough so if you do have glue in there, the glue will adhere to this material right here. And if you have fuzzies, it's deep enough where this material can actually compress down those fuzzies. When a .06 goes across a very wide span like this, you know, it's gonna be elevated, let's say like that, right? And whenever your cutting board is done, or whatever your inlaying is done, you'll be able to kind of knock on it and it's gonna have a very hollow sound. And so that .02 glue gap is just big enough where that glue can adhere so you don't have the hollow sound, and those fuzzies that get trapped underneath that I just took out with that wire brush can get compressed. And so I have done a ton of V-Carve inlays, and this is the glue gap that works best. You can try to go less, that's perfectly fine if you're that good, but that is so key. So let's go over and start programming these parameters right here. If you are interested in getting the digital file that we're using today to create this inlay, it is absolutely free on cicworkshop.com. I will put the link in the description so you can get this digital file that we're using today to create this beautiful board, and you can go back step by step with this video so you know you're doing all of the right things. So that is absolutely free on cicworkshop.com. Love for you to get it, check it out, and start creating beautiful inlays today. Now it's time to program the male part of this inlay. So if we have successfully engraved May, now it's time to do Wally with all of these parameters that we just talked about on our physical model. So the first thing we want to do is we want to actually flip this and mirror it to the right. And the reason you want to mirror it is because whenever we cut this out, we need it to fit. So think about opening and closing a book. So we have to mirror it so whenever we flip it back over on top, it fits in there just fine. So we no longer need this vector anymore. We'll set that to the side and bring our male vector on. The next thing we're going to want to do is put some kind of border around it because we're trying to get the inverse. See, Wally right here needs to get cut out like this. So whenever he flips over and goes into May, he will get flipped over like that and fit snug as a bug in a rug, just like that. So what we have to do then is we need to put some kind of border around this to trick the program to doing the inverse. Now we can put a big square like this, but I personally like coming in over here and putting a border around it. And so we're going to offset the selected vectors and do an outwards border. I like to go about a 1/2 inch. Some people like to go 3/4. Some people like to go less, just depending on how you're gonna cut it out, whether it's a scroll saw or a bandsaw. So we offset these selected vectors. So now that we have the border around it, we can create another V-Carve toolpath. So we go to the V-Carve and engraving toolpath, and we're gonna set up our cutting depths. So we want to achieve this 0.23 plug depth, and so that is going to be our start depth. Very simple. And we want this 0.1 surface gap, so therefore our flat depth is going to be 0.1 of an inch. And these parameters right here will get us exactly this. Because we went 0.25 inches on our pocket, and we want that 0.02 glue gap, our plug depth needs to be this 0.23, which is indeed the start depth. And if I flip this over real quick, you might be able to kind of see how this works. And so that start depth is going down 0.23 inches, and then it's going to flatten out that 0.1. And so you can easily see whenever this is flipped back over, it's doing exactly that. And that's why the start depth is 0.23 inches, which is causing that 0.02 glue gap because we're just not engraving it all the way to the bottom like that. Now, if you wanted a bigger surface gap, let's just say you wanted a 0.15 surface gap, all you'll do is select 0.15 on your flat depth. That's it. Very, very simple. So I'm using the same exact bits, and this is very important. Do not change your bits around. Whatever you use the first time, you need to use the second time. And all we do is select the vectors that we want to get engraved. Once again, I'm using that 3/16 upcut to do the clearing out, and that 30-degree V-bit to do all of the detail work. We hit calculate, and as you can see, the 3/16 upcut is gonna come in and do the bulk of the work. Then we're gonna come in with this 30-degree V-bit and clean everything up. And that's it. That is the inlay. So all we simply did was take our female inlay, we took May, we mirrored her to the right, and then put a border around her. And then did these two settings right here to achieve this right here. So let's hop back to the CNC and get this cut out. So now we're back at the CNC. We have our 3/16 bit in. It's going to do all the clearing out in one pass. We have our material securely fastened to the table. We got our X, Y, and Z zeros set. Now it's time to start carving out Wally right here so he can get all up in Miss May's jazz. Let's get to cutting. How long for this one? So another thing to note as this bit is cutting out is that since it's a 3/16 bit, it can do this all in one pass. Now I have had an 1/8 inch bit be able to do this in one pass before, but it was a little scary. So like I said, I do like that 3/16 bit because it's that happy medium between that 1/4 inch and that 1/8 inch bit, and it's perfect for clear outs. The second thing I want to talk about is this material height right here. That material is 0.6 inches thick. And so how thick should you go on your male inlay inserts? I like to keep it as a rule of thumb, anything over a 1/2 inch thick. Because if you go thinner, whenever you're clamping down something this wide, you may get a little bit of bowing and a little bit of warping. And so a 1/2 inch thick material or thicker is thick enough to have that stability, but thin enough where you're not wasting a lot of material. So I hope that helps, and keep that in mind. This 3/16 bit is cutting out this 0.6 inch thick material. So we got all the material cleared out. We have that 30-degree 3-flute V-bit in there now. And once again, do not change the X and Y origin. Just touch off on the top again to reset your Z height because you did do that bit change. So I'm gonna click go, and this thing is gonna start doing all of the magic so Wally can really come to life. So if you notice, this V-bit is going down 0.33 inches in a single pass, and it's handling it. I don't know if you had a thinner V-bit, if it can do this, so you'd have to take multiple passes. So that's the reason I like this ZRN solid carbide 3-flute V-bit, because it can do all of this with no problem. So our 30-degree V-bit just got done pocketing out Wally. Now I'm gonna stick that 3/16 bit back in there and actually cut everything out. You do not have to. You can use a scroll saw, a bandsaw, but since I already have it on the CNC and I already have the bit, might as well have this bit do all the cutting for me. Let's go. All right, so Wally has been now pocketed and cut out. And so now, since I cut it out with tabs, I just need to kind of pop this out right here, just like that, and get back to work with this stainless steel brush to get out the fuzzies. Now with that being said, as I'm getting these out, I'm a little bit more gentle because these have a little bit more fragile pieces. But since we did do it with that 30-degree bit, they're a little thicker than if you did it with a thinner bit or that really thin tapered ball nose. Now another thing to note is I made another little diagram for your guys. And so these little blue pieces of Scotch tape represent fuzzies, right? And fuzzies are, as you guessed it, lots of these little fuzzies right here, right? Lots of these fuzzies we're gonna try to get out. But if there's any fuzzies left on the very very bottom, and I don't know if you can see some of those, on the very, very bottom of this male part right here, or on the very, very bottom of this female part right here of Miss May, let me show you where that glue gap and surface gap come into handy. So let's say these are the fuzzies on Miss May at the very bottom, and these are the fuzzies on Wally at the very top. Because you have that gap, the fuzzies have somewhere to go and they're gonna compress down if you do not do a perfect cleanup. Because now these fuzzies are hanging here and they're getting compressed down somewhere. And so if you do not have that surface gap, whenever they come down, they'll get compressed right here, and then you don't have a really tight glue up. And so once again, that tolerance or that glue gap and surface gap gives you that little extra room so those fuzzies can kind of just get compressed and go out of the way during the glue up instead of really messing everything up. So now I'm gonna get this thing cleaned up, and then it's time to press Wally into Miss May so they can officially go on their date. All right, now we have Wally cleaned up, we have Miss May cleaned up. I went back and made sure there's no big chunks of wood in any of this, because if there is, on the next step when we're pressing everything down, it's gonna keep it from getting a really good glue up. So we do a quick little dry fit, and we make sure that Miss May is gonna go and have a good, nice date with Wally. And if you can see, just from the side, you have that 1/10 of an inch gap right here, which was our surface gap allowance right there. So whenever this is pressed down, it will get a little bit smaller, but we know that everything is fitting. Once again, up to this point, it wasn't that complicated. The program took care of itself as long as we knew those couple variables. So whenever you're gluing up, here's a couple things that I recommend. Obviously, Tite Bond 2, Tite Bond 3, some type of wood glue, a little brush. I like these little silicone ones. And then you need something to press it with. A lot of people take a piece of plywood or a weight, right? So they take the piece of plywood, stick it on top, put a whole bunch of weights on it, and therefore the thing gets pressed, right? Or you take this and you put a C-clamp on each side and it's gonna press. But on a previous video, I made an inlay press, and this is the coolest thing ever. So we're going to press it together using this inlay press, and if you want to see how it was made, how it was designed, check out the video in the description because I go over everything in that video. I don't think you can put too much glue in all of these gaps. So it takes a little bit, but not really a big deal because any extra glue is either going to go in that glue gap or get squeezed out. All right. So at this part, you do want to make sure that every tiny little crevice has glue, because if it does not have glue, don't rely on the pressure of the inlay spreading it all out. You want to make sure that every single piece of it has glue, because if not, the piece is not going to get held down and it's going to pop right out. So I'm going over everything. It gets a little bit messy. That's why I like these silicone brushes right here. They work really well. Using your finger is really hard to do. Okay, I checked everywhere. There's no missing spots. So let's just say Miss May is ready for her date. This deer should have glue on almost every part. And see right here in the body where it does not have glue, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna make sure I put a little bit more glue right here and right here, because that was from that glue gap being just a little bit too much, which is that 0.02. So as long as I apply enough glue right here on this part and right here, it's going to squeeze down and be just fine. But like I said earlier in the video, if I had a 0.06 glue gap, then the glue would never touch and you'd get that hollow sound whenever you're really like knocking on the cutting board. Once again, not a massive deal, but I like to have contact points across the whole entire thing. So now we put this back in. If I give it a little squeeze down, whoop, give it a little squeeze, come back up. Now we're making contact with those areas, and we know that this is going to be a really, really good glue up. And I know that because I have this inlay press, it's pressing everything really nice. The digital file for this is in the description. And once again, if you want anything you've seen in this video, whether it's the cutting board, whether it's the bits, whether it's maybe you're a little bit more interested in the CNC, all of that is going to be in the description so you can start making beautiful works of art on your machine as quickly as possible. And that's why Cutting It Close exists, to help you on your CNC journey. So this is how the cutting board should look coming out of the press a few days later. So to surface this off, I'm using that 3/16 upcut. This is not anything special. I just drew a square or a rectangle, and the bit is gonna follow that. And so you can see that right here. I'm not gonna do an in-depth thing on this. This is for another video, but just wanna show you what the heck I did. Big square, bit going back and forth, surfacing everything off. Let's go! After the CNC surfaced the top of this board, I took it to the shop, did some additional sanding to it, put a nice little edge, dipped it in a bath of mineral oil, and it looks good. Boom! This is the inlay that y'all guys learned how to do on this video. Walnut into maple. It's absolutely beautiful. If you want this digital file, the link is in the description and it is absolutely free. If you want to learn more about how to do a straight flute inlay, check out this video right here. And remember, if you ain't cutting it close, you ain't cutting it right.